So, welcome to the latest episode of the Project Liberal podcast. I am your host, Josh Eckel, joined today by Jonathan Casey. Good morning.
Hello,
Good
hello.
afternoon. Today, we are joined by someone who I'm a huge fan of, and someone who you probably needs no introduction, Mr. Joe Walsh. Joe, tell me if I missed anything in your bio. I know you come from a career as a talk radio host. You were briefly a congressman from Illinois' 8th District, and I think the most recent major campaign that you launched was a primary challenge against Donald Trump in 2020. Let me know if I missed anything.
What a stupid thing that was. Oh, my God. Yes. No, you got it. And Josh, John, great to be with you both, guys.
Absolutely. So today I wanted to talk to you about a couple different things. The first thing was I wanted to learn a little bit more about your political journey, because I think you have a very unique political story, and you're one of the few people I think that is, I think in the public mind, has transformed in a lot of ways. You've had a series of transformations over the last couple decades. I want to talk also about the Tea Party movement specifically, because I know you were involved at the time when I actually first got involved in politics, which was like the late aughts and the early 2010s, when the rise of the Tea Party movement happened. And I really want to talk to you about what happened. Why is that movement, in my opinion, degraded? And then I want to talk to you a bit about MAGA and the threats that MAGA poses against democracy in our country. But I don't know, Joe, can you tell us a little bit about your background? Like, what got you involved in politics and talk radio? Because I think that's where you started, right?
Actually, it's funny, and great to be with you guys. Talk radio came after I left Congress. I've always been interested in politics. My mom, God rest her soul, loved American history, loved politics. She was a Goldwater girl, but more of an establishment Republican. I've always generally been fairly libertarian leaning, right? I've always been freedom, limited government. But I also am, I've got populist bones in my body. So that's why I'm not identified as Joe Walsh. He's a pure libertarian, because I relate to populism. I was part of that Tea Party wave in 2010, went to Washington, pissed off at both parties. I let both parties know how fucking pissed off I was at them. I didn't last long. Neither party wanted me there. Then I went on talk radio and really got into the whole right-wing media thing. And then I voted for Trump in 2016. Let's stop there. Let's just stop the whole conversation there.
Well, that actually was something I was going to ask you about explicitly. But okay, so the talk radio thing came after. What actually got you involved in the Tea Party movement to begin with? Like, what made you decide to run for Congress, like at the very beginning of that? Because that was a crazy time.
I ran for Congress because I was pissed off about the debt. And 62 of us got elected in 2010, including Justin Amash, and a number of other good guys. And generally, Josh and John, that's kind of what motivated all of us. What was cool about the Tea Party class of 2010 was we had a lot of first-time guys and gals running and serving. A lot of dentists and doctors and businessmen who were just fucking pissed off about Obamacare, the increase in the size of government, and the debt. That's what motivated me. I got there, and I wasn't a kid. I wasn't 27. I think I was in my mid-40s when I got there. And I didn't want to waste a lot of time. So I quickly became known of as a pretty big mouth. And that didn't serve me well in Washington.
So what did you do before, prior to running for Congress?
Kind of a mutt, John. I was a teacher. I taught American history. I taught American politics. I was a social worker. I worked primarily in the nonprofit world. I did a lot of work on the issue of school choice. Kind of a nonprofit cause mission related guy. I've never been motivated by money. I've never made a lot of money. So mostly nonprofit stuff.
Okay, well,
when the Tea Party movement kind of came in, it brought in a lot of young energy, and then over the past decade and a half, we've kind of seen it especially with like the Freedom Caucus, for example, it's kind of morphed into something that it wasn't. Was that mostly because of Trump? Was it what kind of walk us through the journey of what you saw from at the very beginning there, and then kind of where it went after you left? What kind of motivated, what kind of pushed it in the direction that it did go in?
And it's guys, it's so fucking misunderstood that I got to write the book as somebody who was a big part of it. The Tea Party movement is so misunderstood. I always kind of say it like this. I think there were two strands to the Tea Party movement. There were the guys like me and guys like Justin Amash and a guy I thought I knew like Rand Paul. We were all motivated by the size of government and the debt, period. And that was one big strand of the Tea Party movement. Every speech I gave in 2010 to 2012, 2013 was all about we are bankrupting future generations, a pox on both Republicans and Dems. That was one strand. That's the strand I identified with. But you know, as I look back, and I was remiss about this, there was an uglier aspect of the Tea Party. More of the nationalistic strand. The white, the Christian strand, the popular culture strand. And it was there. It wasn't as big when the movement went to Congress, but it was there. But you guys know this. When we went to Congress, and me and Amash and all these other guys, and we went there to cut spending, get rid of Obamacare, cut spending, do something about the debt, we didn't do shit because we couldn't do shit. And I realized that in about an afternoon. So we didn't deliver on any of that. And then I think a lot of the folks out there, the Tea Party folk, became really restless and rightly angry with us. And this uglier, more nationalistic strand of the Tea Party movement came to the fore, and that's what Trump tapped into.
That's okay. So that's the, and just to say it back to you for the sake of our audience, I mean, that's what I remember. So I was 18 in 2012, showing my age a little bit here, but I was just coming into politics, and I was, as a young person looking at the Obama bailouts, and as a millennial about to enter the workforce, a recession, economic uncertainty, and I really resonated with the narratives that you mentioned. Like, let's cut spending, let's try to get the government back in order, let's try to not spend my tax dollars to bail out these massive corporations that ripped off American workers. And then somehow along the way, as you said, like it was honestly around like 2015, 2016, I think, where that stopped being the narrative and it started to go in towards this Charlottesville route. And I felt the same people that I was like partnering with kind of gave up on the idea of limited government. And they started saying things like we should use the government against our enemies. They started maligning immigrants and poor people. So do you feel like that was because they failed and they needed to pivot to a new strategy? Were they following the money? Like, what do you think caused that shift in the movement? Because it really was like, I guess it was Trump, maybe. I mean, that's a catalyst. But I'm curious as to where.
Well, Josh, are you talking about the shift? And you're right about the shift. Are you talking about among voters, kind of the Tea Party voters, or are you talking about among the Tea Party members, elected officials, and media voices?
Well, it's kind of a combination of both. I mean, the voters are kind of fluid, right? Like I was a Republican primary voter in 2012. In 2016, when Trump was nominated, I left that movement, but I could have still been retained if I would have had, say, a presidential candidate that would have, not been Trump. So yeah, I mean, maybe from your perspective, as somebody who was seeing what was happening behind the scenes, or at least talking to people on radio and hearing the voice of the movement, do you have any commentary on just why that transition happened?
So I think, and again, I come from a unique place in that I'm a former congressman and I'm a former nationally syndicated right-wing media guy who was on Fox News all the time. And most of my former colleagues in both of those professions sold their souls to what this new thing is. Very few of us did not. Why did they do that? Why the shift? I think a combination of things. We went to Washington. The Tea Party movement was a populist movement. It was. Rightly so. And my whole thing, guys, on populism is a thing where average people are pissed off at a fucking political system that is not listening to them or paying attention to their needs. for whatever reason. It can be used for good and bad, but anger is a big part of it. Anger sent us to Washington. We didn't deliver on anything. We couldn't, but we didn't. And I think then a lot of people grew disenchanted. And then along came, and then so you had this building anger, which began to morph into, let's keep immigrants out. Obama was black. There are only two fucking genders. And this stuff started to come out more. Trump, who's no dummy on how to tap into stuff, tapped into this populist anger, the other strand of the movement, and away it went. And all of my former colleagues in Congress privately told me at the time, what the fuck is this? But they saw what was happening, and they said, see ya, Joe, I'm going to ride that. So they got on board.
It's the crazy difference between Rand Paul today and the kind of things he's talking about versus Rand Paul in 2016. You can actually see the difference. Lindsey Graham saying we'll get destroyed, right? You see the transition of the last couple of years. Sorry to cut you off, John.
I think there's two sides to populism, right? There's this side of populism that is a grassroots movement of people, of voters, getting involved in politics and pushing ideas that they believe in to the front. The other side of populism, it's related, but it's also can be very dangerous. It's where a politician isn't interested in achieving certain results for the country or moving the country forward. It is this idea that he will say whatever it is that is popular, not because it's good for us, but simply because it gets him what he wants and not what the ground support wants. So there's two sides to populism, and we kind of saw it start out as the good kind, as the grassroots movement, and then we saw it end up very much in this, Trump tapping into that energy.
Hey, John, that's really smart. And I want to go back to something Josh said, then I'll go there. I will go to my grave so profoundly disappointed, you two, with how so many of my former colleagues reacted to this shift. Rand Paul and I were close. I thought we were soul brothers, right, on this shit. Mike Lee. There was probably nobody in Washington I was closer to than Mike Lee. This kills me. I don't even recognize him. Jim Jordan and I were close. I get why Jim Jordan did what he did. That's Jim Jordan. I get it, right? That's who he is. But as you said, Josh, some of the principled limited government libertarian dudes that I thought were my brothers, put it on the shelf. Look, and this will segue us, Trump's running in 16. I'm on the radio, 200 stations around the country. I'm one of the biggest right-wing populist voices out there. I voted for Trump. I didn't pay much attention to him because I figured he's just a goof and he'll go to Washington and maybe a couple good things will happen. But I voted for Trump because, John, to your point, I felt like our system needed disruption. Our political system's broken. Our two-party system sucks. We need 5 parties. And I felt that at the time, and I said it at the time. So we needed disruption, and there's good disruption and bad disruption. He turned out to be an evil disruptor. But I understood why people said, let's shake it up, let's burn it down. That was kind of what I believed, and I got that.
Yep. So, okay, well, something changed. And so, like, for me, I see today the Trump thing as a litmus test in a lot of ways. I mean, if you can look at somebody, especially in our movement, so let's say the broadly liberal, libertarian, classical liberal movement, if you can look at somebody like Trump, who's literally running on a platform of make me a dictator, I want to get revenge, I don't believe in democracy. I mean, that's basically what he's running for. If you can't look at that and say unabashedly, that's wrong, that's evil, must be denounced, and must be defeated, that's a litmus test for me. If you make excuses that go, well, it might result in more limited government if we can beat... No, it's not the conversation. Like, that is so overt tyranny in your face. So it's a litmus test. But something happened for you where you woke up and realized between 2016 and 2020 the threat that he faced. And I'm curious as to what that was for you, because I know for me, when I saw him come down the escalator, I saw him as a goof, but I was taking a lot of the things that he said seriously. And I was very concerned by it. And it felt like for me, it was a couple of years before a lot of people came around, especially on the Republican side. Some still haven't. But I'm curious as to like, what was the moment for you where you were like, okay, wait a minute. I made the wrong decision here and I need to change course.
When he came down that escalator, and then you two may remember the first Republican debate, I think in September of 15.
Yep.
At both of those moments, again, I'm on the radio talking to the base every day, what became the MAGA base, my following. And when he came down that escalator and he got in that first debate, every one of my Republican colleagues and the entire Republican establishment would reach out to me and fucking laugh and shake their head and say, what the hell is this? This is ridiculous. This isn't going to last. But then, guys, I'd go on my radio show that night, and every Republican base voter would call in and say, Joe, I fucking love it. Finally, somebody hears me. Finally, they're going to keep people out of the country illegally. Finally, somebody's going to bring back, I'm going to be able to say Merry Christmas proudly. All of this shit. But like Josh and John, the dichotomy of the base instantly got it. The establishment laughed at it. I voted for him in 2016, and I've publicly apologized this publicly about 100 times. I didn't pay enough attention to him. I understood why my people supported him, but I didn't pay enough attention to him. The moment he got elected, Josh, I started to pay attention to him every single day. Every day. And I remember a month and a half into his presidency in 2017, I came home from doing my radio show. I'm sitting at dinner with my wife, and I turned to her, and this was a month into his presidency, and I said, Sweetie Pie, this is not going to end well for me and for us. I'm going to have to turn against him, and it will ruin my livelihood and my career and threaten my life. And so then what I did was every day for the next year and a half, slowly I kept speaking out against him. And slowly I kept losing listeners and followers, and Fox News said, fuck you, Joe. And radio advertisers said, what are you doing? And my management team said, Joe, support Trump. And Republicans would call me and say, Joe, if you don't stop this, you're never going to be able to run again. But I kept at it. And then the final straw, you two, was Helsinki in the summer of 2018, when that son of a bitch traitor stood in front of the world and embraced Putin instead of our own intelligence officials. I went on the radio that night and I said, I'm going to do everything I can to make sure Trump's not reelected. The minute I did that, everything ended.
You kind of touch on this echo chamber that the right has found itself in, and the left absolutely has found itself in its own echo chamber. How do we start to break that apart? Because we see this on social media. Everyone is stuck, their algorithm is only feeding what they want to hear. They are only listening to the people they agree with. How do we start breaking that apart? Because I really think that's one of the biggest issues in American politics right now.
It may be
that's
the
a
biggest.
tough question.
John, it may be the biggest, and I don't think there's an easy way to break it. I think we have to crash. Fox News could give me a show tomorrow, and I don't think anybody, the Fox News audience, would listen to me. I could get my talk radio show back, and I don't think I'd have a conservative audience. I think this tribal, divisive bullshit has to play itself out. And I think courageous voices, and by the way, you guys, this is one great thing about libertarians, they call out both fucking extremes. You guys do this. More and more courageous voices gotta just be willing to walk away from it all and say, John, what you just said, that we gotta talk to each other across the divide and we gotta stop this. But you're younger than I am, both of you. This is gonna take a long time.
Well, I do think the next generation gives me a little bit of hope. I mean, it is worth noting that like the majority of Americans now are not affiliated with either major party, and effectively the major parties are just becoming these kind of fringe extreme groups that are pulling, whiplashing the plurality around. And honestly, the thing that does give me the most hope, and this is not because I support the left or anything like that, but it's because I see Gen Z and millennials, they're literally swinging against the Republican Party extremely hard. I think Gen Z is associates themselves with center left to the tune of 80%.
Yeah.
Now, hopefully that doesn't transform into a socialist vision of the country. And I think that's where we as thinkers, influencers, influential people need to show people the power of the market, why fiscal responsibility is important. And I think it's something that I didn't really truly start to understand until I got older anyway. But if these young people are instinctively against the rise of authoritarianism on the right, they may be the difference between us having an election and not, and the defeat of Trumpism and whatnot. So I am curious, Joe, you did take a step that a lot of your colleagues didn't. And you can still hear us, right?
Yeah, I can. I just kind of lost myself there for a minute.
No worries. I was going to say you did something that your colleagues did.
By the way, Josh, can I say one thing, then continue this question?
Sure.
We talked about this last weekend. The country's frozen right now because it's Biden-Trump. And I'm frozen right now. 10 years ago, I said we need a third party, a fourth party. 10 years ago, I said blow up the primary system. 10 years ago, I said get rid of the Electoral College. But now I'm frozen in that all I'm focused on, because I believe he's an existential threat to our democracy. Like right now, I've put everything on hold again to try to stop him. But I think after the 24 election, I think there's going to be a marketplace of reforms coming down the pike.
I agree. I couldn't agree more. And I think one thing I do agree with you on is that the defeat of Trump is probably the most important issue of 2024. If not, it is the most important issue. We have to defeat him. But that was where I was going with this, though, is actually you touched exactly where I was going. So many of your equivalents in major politics today, people that are actually, leading the national conversation against Trump, people like Liz Cheney or Chris Christie or whatever, they've gone so far to say similar things to you. They've said Trump must be defeated, but they haven't gone far enough to say, hey, I'm supporting Biden, right? So I'm curious as to what made you to say that you felt like that was an important thing to do. I think I know the answer, but I'm just curious as to your reasoning behind that transition, that change.
And I'll start, you two, by saying fuck Chris Christie. And I'll explain that in a moment. When I challenged Trump in the 2020 primary, and when I got out of that race, because I got my butt handed to me, I went on CNN and they asked me if I would support the Democratic candidate in the general. And I said, of course. And it doesn't matter to me who that candidate is. Bernie Sanders, I'm on Team Bernie. Because at that time, campaigning against Trump, by that time, I understood completely that he was an existential threat to our democracy. I believe that in my bones, Josh. It's utterly inconsistent to me, and you two may and probably will disagree with me. It's utterly inconsistent to me to say this candidate, if elected, is an existential threat to our democracy, and then not say, therefore, I am going to support the only candidate who can keep him from becoming president. That's like a logical two-step that I don't know how anybody else can take. But I do know why they don't take it, Josh. Chris Christie still wants to be a viable Republican. Liz Cheney has not given up that hope yet. My buddy Adam Kinzinger has said he's supporting Biden. Because Josh and Jonathan, once you do that as a Republican, once you say, therefore, I'm all in on Team Biden, your career as a Republican is over.
I see.
And they don't want to give that up.
Well, look at what happened to Amash after voting to impeach Trump. How much, just not even going as far as to support Biden in an election, but simply saying, yes, this man deserves to be removed from office. Look at what they've done to him. They he decided not to run again, but in the primary they poured a bunch of money into then they primaried his replacement. But yeah, you could just see what would happen right there.
And
You
I
have
think
to have a
that
gut
maybe,
check. You have to have a gut check before you do it. And I had to do it 5 years ago. You have to look in your soul and understand that if you do what I did, you are giving up your livelihood. And we don't talk about this a lot, guys, but you become a target, a big target. And you have to be ready to do that. That's hard for people.
Yeah, and I think that people like Chris Christie and Liz Cheney, they've already made that decision but it's like, as you said, it's like, I mean, just by speaking out against the cult of Trump, they've become maligned by him. I mean, obviously Liz Cheney was a massive target. So it is a little funny to me that they're not willing to take that risk. I mean, one of the things that I will say is that I couldn't agree more with you. I don't see Biden and Trump as equivalent. And one of the things that I've said for a long, long time, this is me speaking as an individual. Like, I was in the same boat as you for year after year after year. Like in 2012, 2016, I was like, hey, we need to, let's blow it up. Let's bring a third party in. I voted for Gary Johnson. I've never voted for any candidate other than third party candidate. But in 2024, I look at the situation and I go, this is not. I looked at even Trump and Biden in 2020 retroactively and incorrectly as very similar, right? Same thing in 2016. I didn't see much of a major difference. In 2024, I do see a choice between a candidate that said, I want to end democracy, and a candidate that says, I'm not going to do that. And so that alone changes the calculation in my mind. Now, I'm not in a swing state, so I have I think I have a different calculation.
But Josh,
but
I'm gonna compliment you, and then I'm gonna ask you a question. Kudos to you for saying that, because there are way too many folks like us who kind of say, do the both sides thing. They're both bad. They're both unfit. Biden's 100 years old. He's unfit too. I see a lot of that in the libertarian movement. They both suck. No, there is a difference here. There is a fundamental difference between these two when it comes to threat level. But so I ask you, Josh, in Tennessee, if your vote would determine who the president is in Tennessee, who would you vote for?
That should be no surprising. I would absolutely vote for Biden over Trump if I had to choose between that dichotomy, right?
Jonathan, this is why I have a man crush on him.
I mean, I think that's clear to anyone who talks to me or follows me that that's the case. And it's simply due to that. It's like, listen, I disagree with Joe Biden on almost all of his policies, but at least we get another shot in 4 years. Whereas if we're talking about the difference between Trump, I mean, I think he's going to have a vice president that it's already clear the vice presidential picks he's picked don't even think they seem like they'd be willing to make the same decision Mike Pence did on January 6th. That alone should be a massive red flag for every human being. So, and honestly, Trump and Biden's policies, there are things on the edges that do matter, but there are a lot of similarities when you look at it in the aggregate. So, yeah, I definitely, that's controversial in the libertarian space, but I do think that's something that has to be said in 2024.
Thank you.
For sure.
John, we talked earlier about how the Tea Party movement was a bunch of new people going into politics. Josh and I have talked a lot about how do we get young people into politics, because it's really bad out there. Young people just simply aren't as interested in politics as they have been in the past. As far as getting involved, they'll go out to vote, and they've been doing that at high levels. But actually getting in politics, running for office, running for city council, we've seen that a decline in that. And so how do we turn that around? How do we get a Tea Party movement for the next generation to kind of move us past some of this stuff? Are we going to be stuck with this kind of this? Once Trump's is gone, are we going to be done with him, or are we going to still have this MAGA movement moving along? Or are we going to be able to move, bring young people in to kind of energize people in a different direction than simply culture war?
And maybe I agree with Josh on this. I think it's going to happen naturally. I think younger Americans right now are super engaged. And you're right, they're overwhelmingly left of center, because why would they want to be a part of an intolerant, authoritarian, embracing right? But I think they're super engaged. They've been super engaged the last few election cycles. They are bummed out now because they don't want to see this movie again.
Yeah.
So there's an immediate challenge now. Because, Jonathan, I think it's going to happen after 24. Again, I think there's going to be flowers are going to bloom politically after 24. We're going to see movements for reform and shit going on like we haven't seen. Both parties are going to go through a real soul searching. Another party will come to the fore. I believe that. So I think young people are going to take care of themselves. My worry is the short term with young people, because if they don't come out like they have the last 2 cycles for Biden, Trump will win. And we may disagree on the Middle East, the 3 of us. Biden generally is pretty pro-Israel. I happen to believe that's the right stance. That bums out his base, and that divides young people. This is going to be a problem getting them out.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest threat right now to Joe Biden's coalition is his stance on the Palestine-Israel situation. I think he is making the right decision by backing Israel with hesitation, right? Like, we don't need to give Israel a blank check, but the idea that Israel has the right to defend themselves, I believe it's the same thing that applies to Ukraine. Ukraine has the right to defend themselves, and I think that's true. The one thing I will say that's interesting, and this is actually a good transition into one of the big things I want to discuss with you, is that I see the civil war on the left between what I would call the illiberal left and the liberal Democrats playing out in the context of October 7th and what happened after October 7th more. I see it almost like 2016 all over again on the left. So like I look at there's a lot of communist type, tanky type people that really buy into this identity politics stuff. They buy into the colonizer narrative, and in a way they've become like they're obviously there's a lot of anti-Semitism on that side, and that is really a major fault line on the left right now between those people that have been part of the traditional left coalition and the liberal center-left Democrats, which are the people like Joe Biden. And that divide not only threatens Joe Biden's coalition, but I think it also, the bigger conversation is, it opens up this interesting political dichotomy, I think, now, where we have the far left is kind of their own growing coalition. The far right, the MAGA right, is their own growing coalition. And in the middle, there's this alienated center-left and center-right, pro-liberal values, pro-Israel and pro-Ukraine coalition, right? And they are spread between 2 parties that really don't want them. They're politically homeless. And that's the movement that we see at Project Liberal that we want to try to position ourselves to grow into, is because we see if those people could find a way to work together, that is a much larger than 33% coalition. That's enough to defeat a liberalism on the far left and the far right. The problem is right now they're spread between 2 parties or independent. There's no coherent coalition there. But I think one is forming. And I'm curious as to whether or not you see the same thing.
I think, Josh, after 24, there will be a new political party in this country within 2 election cycles that will be primarily a center-right party. And I think it will be an instant force. I believe my former party, the Republican Party, is a shrinking, dying national party. I think it'll become a strong regional, rural party, no matter what happens in 24. You made a great point. Because Republicans are so fucked up and so batshit crazy and so cultish, and because they've given up on the democratic fucking process, we overlook the issues the Democratic Party has. The Democratic Party hasn't had to examine their closet, their shit. Man, after this election, guys, the Dems are going to go through a real civil war revolution. That who knows what that will produce. But I think you're going to see pretty quickly a new party forming, kind of center-right.
Do you think that, because my hope is exactly that. I mean, my hope would be that we'd have, and John, I know you probably want to chime in here too, but my hope is that we do have a new political party take the place of one of the 2 old ones. I think that the 2-party system is a consequence of our first past the post political system. If you have a plurality takes all, it's just going to always coalesce around 2 major parties. So my best hope, I think, for anyone of our political persuasion is that a new party would take the place of one of the old parties. But do you think that if Trumpism is really soundly defeated, and they have another election where they just completely get their ass handed to them. Do you think that opens the door for a reinvention of the Republican Party, like what happened in 2016? I mean, my concern is that it's going to go far more illiberal, but I mean, it could open the door. Do you think that's viable at all, or that could happen?
I could easily be wrong, but I don't. I think this party is on this train track, and I don't think it's changing. I don't think Trumpism will get its ass handed to it in 24. But even if it did, remember a lot of MAGA are people who aren't really Republicans, and that's why Trump was always going to be the nominee, because if Trump wasn't the nominee, 30 to 40% of the Republican base wouldn't support the Republican nominee. So no other nominee could win. Trump always knew that. But no, Josh, I think the base of my former party, middle-aged and older white people. Older white people tend to die eventually, sooner than you two will die. And they're gonna, it's just gonna, and they're not it's not replacing itself.
Yeah.
And I could, if Trumpism got its butt handed to it in 24, and I came back out in 26 and I said, doggone it, I'm going to be a Republican again. I'm going to run as a Republican. I couldn't win. Chris Christie couldn't win. Adam Kinzer, Justin Amash couldn't win a primary. Yeah. This is going to take cycles to play itself out. And I think, final thought, this is why I believe a third party, a major third party that will be on par with these two parties, is going to come a hell of a lot faster than people think is, because, again, we're all frozen right now, but after 24, major names who are not politicians, major money that is not political, is going to get engaged.
Yeah.
And that's going to revolutionize stuff.
I think we're starting to see rumbles of it with RFK, with some of these other third-party candidates. We're already starting to see there's a massive appetite for it. And we talk about Trump being a threat, and one of the, I think, biggest mistakes is that the Democrats aren't nominating somebody else but Biden. Because I think that with Biden, we saw the recent report about his memory, his and sometimes when he speaks, you kind of get these clips. It's like, okay, he's not quite all there yet. But then you look at Trump, and he's definitely not all there. So I think that this has been a major. I think that you're right, that especially if let's say Biden and then he gets reelected and some kind of medical episode or something happens. I think that is going to be a catalyst for the Democrats to go, okay, wait a second, we've got to think about what's going on. And especially if they lose, I can only imagine what the Democrats are going to go through if Trump wins, what then they're going to be going through in that process of soul searching, because they're going to realize, wait a second, we've stuck to this guy and we failed to get the job done. I think he was a good candidate for 2020, because I think he was the guy you always knew, the reliable, steady, guy. But again, that doesn't excite people. The young people aren't as excited about that, and so I think that Democrats are going to have it's going to be a very interesting time for them. And yeah, you're right. Both parties are going to be soul searching in the next 4 to 5 years, regardless of what happens. Well, if Republicans win, they're not going to soul search. They're just going to ride this wave out for the next 4 years, and then I think that I think that they're going to, once Trump is done, then they're going to have that conversation.
A way to put it, guys, is like the Republicans had their Civil War, and MAGA won.
Yes.
The Democrats are going to have their Civil War.
Yes. And I'm concerned that the far left will win on the center left, and that's the thing that concerns me the most, because really right now it's really weird. Like the fiscal response, the most fiscally responsible party right now is the Democratic Party. When you look at aggregate, so it's like the actual center movement is more represented by the Democrats than the Republicans. And if the Democrats fully embrace the illiberal far left, then everyone in that coalition, the majority is homeless. The majority of the the voting base, I believe, is homeless. So it will. You're right. I think we'll have to something will have to break.
It's too bad. One thing that's too bad, guys. It's too bad Biden's so old, because when Biden won in 20, he had the opportunity to lead a major political realignment in this country. If he were younger and more energetic, Josh, to your point, the minute he got elected in 20, he should have turned to his left flank and he should have said, I love you guys and gals, but shut the hell up for 4 years. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this Democratic Party and I'm going to grab all these reasonable people in the center and make them part of our big coalition, guys, right? We have an opportunity, because that party is batshit crazy, to expand our party. He should have done that.
Well, in a way, he could. Yeah, I agree. He should have made it a priority. In a way, he's kind of done that as a consequence of just his policies. But
well, he's done that because he's not Trump, right? And one of the things that I think Trump has done that Democrats really haven't is Trump gave people a vision for the country. Trump said, this is what America should be. And I completely disagree that, and I do not think it should be that. But he gave people that vision, and Democrats have never really been able to do that. They've played too much into the identity politics, too much into the America has this horrible history. And listen, I agree. America has had a horrible history, but they've never given Americans a sense of, okay, Obama did. Obama did give people a sense of that, and Biden doesn't. Biden doesn't give people a sense of, okay, this is what America should be about, right? And Trump does that. The Democrats are going to have, if they want to have that, if they want to bring people in from the Senate, they're going to have to be able to do that.
John, the other thing Trump does, and this Republican Party does, is we live in a populist moment. The Republicans demagogue this moment and feed us bad populist shit, but the Democrats don't even understand the populist moment we're living in. Like, they don't understand the voter anger. Republicans do. They just feed them bad shit. They take advantage of it. Democrats don't recognize the anger.
Yeah.
So, okay, well then we're at 42, 43 minutes, and I think our goal is to keep this under an hour. One of the things that I wanted to ask you about, and this is a good transition, is what does that new coalition stand for? What do you think that new coalition should stand for? So, there's a lot. It's easier. Spend a lot of time. I know I'm on Twitter like everyone else, talking about the things that we hate. But I do think it would. I am curious as to, like, when you think about a coalition that would be your dream coalition, what would that be? And I'll start real quick with a couple things that I'm passionate about, and maybe you can piggyback off of it. The first thing that I think we need to do in this coalition is build an optimistic and positive view of the future. So, like, not even talking about policy, just like be proud to be an American, right? Like, America has an amazing liberal tradition, and it's been an amazing force for good, and it feels like everyone hates it now. Everyone's demeaning it. But I feel like there needs to be somebody that embraces, like, the positive, optimistic view of being in America and what American liberal values mean if applied to the future. And then I'm also think, like, there's no party that's, like, really fully embracing free trade and the power that free trade brings to pull people out of poverty and increase your quality of life and all those things. And then there's fiscal responsibility, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm curious, Joe, if you had to choose your big guiding principles, what do you think they should be for the
but understand, in my dream world, my guiding principles are, I'm exaggerating slightly. There's no federal government, barely. There's no income tax. I mean, so I'm not giving you my ideal. I'm 60 years old, and I'm going to give you on what I think now can work. In my ideal utopia, we live in a limited government. Leave me alone. I'll leave you alone. Let's all love and embrace each other. Stay the fuck out of my life. Stay out of my wallet kind of a world. To me, the principles of this new movement, which will be a party, are kind of and I love what you said, Josh, kind of a radically centrist, common sense, tolerant, embracing, let's get shit done party. A party that embraces immigrants from all over the world. Come on in, guys. A party that is tolerant, right, of all Americans of different beliefs and creeds and lifestyles and you name it. And a party that generally pushes, we got to do more for ourselves. free trade. We need to begin to envision a country where government is not so big, where we can do more for each other. But that kind of in a centrist, center-right lane.
I think if there was any sort of pro-immigrant, pro-free trade, limited government, fiscally responsible coalition or major party, that party would absolutely win.
And Josh, socially, embracing tolerance socially.
Yes. Yeah, because that is
You're not going to win young people. The only young people you're going to win over on a socially intolerant plank are the online trolls. And guess what? You don't need them.
No, they're a fringe minority, and young people are very, very, very socially liberal. So that's absolutely the case. Okay, so all right, well then let's take us out. What would you recommend to our audience if they, first of all, they want to get involved and do more? Where do you, I don't know, like if you had to speak to our audience, which is very much part of this new coalition, I think. What recommendation and advice would you give them going into this presidential election and beyond?
Well, look, going into this presidential election, I think stuff's going to happen after the 24 election. But I would say to everybody listening to us right now, if you want this country to be in a position where we can begin to engage in stuff you want to happen, Donald Trump has to lose and be out of the picture. Until that happens, we are frozen. Again, selfishly, that's why I'd encourage everybody, suck it up and vote for the only guy who can beat Donald Trump. But then beyond that, major political reform is coming. I always, whenever I speak to people, especially young people, don't run for office, don't get involved in politics. Find a political reform that you believe in or a cause or an issue you believe in and sink your teeth in that cause or issue or political reform. And if you want to run, that will lead to running for office. But don't get involved in electoral politics. Get involved in issues and causes.
I like it. I don't know, John, you got anything else you want to add or ask before we take it out?
No, I'd be curious. I've asked a few guests this, but what is your definition of liberalism? True definition of true liberalism. What would you say if you could pare it down?
Pare down. It's tolerance. It's a society, John, where we all live our lives, keep most of what we make, take care of each other, are tolerant of people who disagree with us. And we've got this thing called government over there that we only use to make sure that everything I just said that I do is protected, all my rights, and everything you do is protected, all your rights. And that's it. That's it. To me, that's ultimate classical liberalism. You guys know this. Our founders were classical liberals. I'm an old guy, but I never ever, maybe it's because I've taught it so much, I never get blown away by the fact that libertarians started this country. Classical liberals launched this experiment. We're a million miles removed from that, but to me, classic liberalism is what started this country. You live your life, you raise your kids, you make your money, government stays out of your life, we all take care of each other, and we embrace and are tolerant of everybody else.
Here. I had at LibertyCon, we must have just passed each other, not met up, but I had a debate on national divorce. And one of the things I talked about was, I'm not ready to see the American experiment end. It's the greatest political experiment human history has ever attempted. Let's see where this goes. It's still worth protecting and preserving and seeing where we end up.
Okay, so I'm going to disagree with you, young man. And I was talking about a national divorce 10 years ago before anybody knew who Marjorie Taylor Greene was. I agree with you. I hope we keep this thing together. I hope we stick together. But I don't believe that if we don't, it's necessarily a bad thing. It's just the natural progression of things. I believe historically people move from great freedom to great dependence upon government and complacency, and we're there. I don't know what this will lead to. And I do believe, I'm someone who believes, I know constitutionally, right, Texas doesn't have a right to secede. Well, fuck it. If Texas says they want to secede, something's going to happen.
Yeah.
I hope it doesn't, Jonathan. But look, we got to fight to keep this thing. And if we can't, and if the federal government becomes so damn big, and if people's natural God-given rights are abridged, shit may happen. Shit may happen.
No, you're right. The Constitution must be defended. I mean, the reason why I'm opposed to national divorce on principle is because I think the U.S. Constitution is one of the greatest, documents ever created, and it's the ability to, it is, not only resulted in the greatest, country in the world, but it's resulted in protecting an incredible amount of freedom for people. And I'm in a state, Joe, where I would literally be barred from running for office because I'm not a Christian if I lived in Tennessee and the Tennessee Constitution applied. So I don't know necessarily if localization always necessarily increases freedom, but I do agree with what you said, which is if a sovereign people say we want this to be our future and they say we want to do that, then they should be allowed to do that without the threat of coercion.
Agreed.
But I think they're making a mistake.
Totally agree. I hope we don't get there, John, but totally agree that they should have a right to do it. It's up to us to make sure we never get there.
Well, I appreciate you mentioning that. In those that debate will be on the will be out there in the ether here soon, and same for you, Joe, and all the stuff that I think you did at the Students for Liberty conference. I enjoyed watching that. But for our audience, if you're interested in learning more about Joe, follow him at Walsh Freedom on X, and I know you've got a podcast called White Flag on YouTube that people can check out. White Flag with Joe Walsh. Anything you want to add before we take it out, Joe?
No, just thank you, Project Liberal. I love what you guys are trying to do here, and let me know how I can help with anything to advance what you're putting out there.
Thanks for all you do, Joe.
Thanks, guys.
See ya.
Thank you.